All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Wolfpack Wellness Research Web Series. I'm your host, Dr. Susie Goodell. This series is a collaboration between the University Wellness Advisory Committee, the NC State Libraries, and NC State WellRec. We aim to discuss the wellness research happening across NC State's campus. And for those of you joining us live via Zoom, you can submit your questions to our speaker in the chat function. And we'll also have a time at the end of the show to ask more questions. Today's guest is Dr. Michelle Schroeder-Moreno. The award-winning professor is, she is an award-winning professor. She is now the director of education programs, or is it the whole thing, not just education programs?
The whole shebang.
She is the director of the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, CEFS. And she's also the founder, and did you give up the director position? I forgot to ask you this, with the Agroecology Education Farm.
We're in transition.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. She wears many hats, and her goal is to train students as future food system leaders that can critically analyze agriculture and food challenges from a multidisciplinary and holistic lens, and develop sustainable solutions that are environmentally sound, socially and culturally acceptable, and economically viable. And I want to say thank you for joining us today, Dr. Schroeder-Moreno. Would you prefer I call you Michelle?
Yes, please.
I figured. So thanks for joining us today. It's really great to have you. For those of you who don't know, Michelle and I have a lot of history, as well as our children are the same age and in the same class for a while there. So seniors, but that is not why we are on the call today. Instead, we're here to talk about your research and all the things that you do, Michelle. So why don't you just first, I've been using the word agroecology a lot lately to describe what you're doing, but I don't always use the definition. So why don't we start there?
That's a great place. Actually, I had that, I tend to say I'm an agroecologist, and then I follow it up with what agroecology is. And what it is is the application of concepts and principles from ecology to the sustainable design and management of agriculture and food systems. So I was actually trained as an ecologist, ecology and evolutionary biology. And I've always worked in agriculture and diverse systems and different crops. I think that we've been doing agroecology, we just haven't formalized it as a discipline. And so when I was hired, that's what I was hired to do, both in developing classes and minor, and then steps towards a major program. So we do have a cross-departmental major with crop and soil science and horticulture science, agroecology and sustainable food systems. And as Susie mentioned, or Dr. Goodell, before the major, I wanted to develop a really living, learning laboratory. So the agroecology education farm, where we can talk a lot about these concepts in a classroom, but really where that, I think, more profound learning happens is experiential, whether it be with communities, and certainly in a place that we can grow food and get your hands dirty, literally. So that's been ongoing, the farm, for about 13 years. And I've been at NC State for 18 years now. It goes by quickly.
Time flies.
Yeah, as Susie mentioned, I'm now the director for our Center for Environmental Farming Systems, and I'll just tell you a little bit about that. It's a partnership actually with NC State, NCA&T, and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So together, we help manage our Cherry Farm, which is one of our 18 research stations throughout North Carolina. It's located in Wayne County, out east in Goldsboro. And it's dedicated to sustainable agriculture and food system research, education, and extension, kind of our land grant mission. And it's one of the largest and unique facilities we have in the nation right here in North Carolina. I think I also just like to say Susie did a great job with the definition of sustainability. Another way I think about it is sustainability in agriculture is really adding a triple bottom line. So in agriculture, we always think about the economic bottom line. And what we're adding to that is also balancing, not degrading our environment or natural resource base of which our food depends upon, the soil, the water. And also the people involved in agriculture, the human, the social and cultural part of things too, kind of the knowledge base of agriculture. And so keeping those things in balance for the long term, in the face of the disturbances we know that are happening and those that we may not know that are happening, the resiliency part is where we're interested in. My position was 80% teaching. And so I did do a bit of research, like a little bit, tiny bit, 20%. I can tell you about that a little bit and how I applied agroecology to it. So my training is in understanding the ecology of small beneficial arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And they are beneficial. They're providing plants and crops added benefits of increased nutrient uptake, and also kind of using our soil particles together and increasing aggregation, preventing erosion, protecting from other pathogens. And so I think when I was thinking about health and wellness, I think both agroecology is directly impacts health and wellness when I think about how we can develop sustainable solutions to those wicked problems of our food and agricultural systems, whether it be from production or food system, food insecurity kind of lens, to even focusing on these tiny little soil fungi, understanding their impacts and promoting below ground soil diversity. Soil health is really the foundation of our crop health, which impacts human health too. So they're all kind of interconnected. And I often make this analogy in class with mycorrhizal fungi, or soil biology and the diversity, just like we want a healthy gut for our human health. It's the same thing in the soil. And so that soil health really depends upon the microbe diversity and their functioning. And we don't, usually see them. They're small and below our feet, but it's really critical to our health of our plants, animals, and of course our food system.
Thank you, Michelle. That was a really great introduction to what you do and in the general work that you've been pursuing. So here's the big question. I know a lot of people are really interested in your work and the work happening at CEFS. And while you may not be able to engage so much in the research side of things these days, I'd love to hear what kinds of research are going on there. Research topics are going on there, and how is that? I mean, like you said, there's 3 different partners coming together, and of course the community on top of it. How's that working out, and what are some of the key things happening these days?
Yeah, it's I'll just highlight or spotlight a few things because it is hard to mention everybody equally. One, I always like to say, we've been doing climate change impact work in agriculture for about 28 years now. And we just maybe haven't communicated that, or people don't recognize that. We have a long-term farming systems trial, so 28 years to infinity, where we can look at systems, organic, conventional. These are some of our important production systems, grains, wheat, potatoes, things that in North Carolina, even how crop animal rotations, as well as a succession, so just not involved in agriculture, and how those are impacting over time yields, how in impacts of climate, so how climates are changing. We're measuring the abiotic environment. I'm one partner that looks at the mycorrhizal fungi, but we have others that look at other microbes, weeds, insects, and we come together to try to understand that. Most recently, a highlight, I think in the past 4 or 5 years, we have a way, in the beginning, it was about carbon and looking at how much soil carbon, for example, as well as the carbon that's in the plants, how much agriculture is contributing to that, and how we can do positive things like reduce tillage, putting more organic matter through cover crops, rotation, animals, perennials. We also have forestry out there. But now it's also, how are we impacting nitrogen? And so one of our newest things is we have robots in the field that are automatically sampling nitrous oxides. That's one of the contributors to greenhouse gas in these different systems, not all of the systems, but some of the key ones. And so we can look at that over time. And I say, we're out east. So it's not just the impact of these systems, it's the impact of these systems with these disturbances, i.e. hurricanes. So, and they're becoming a bit more frequent, and we have periods of drought and then too much water. So we're also kind of being able to look at that too, which is really exciting. And we have new faculty and new technology and sensors out there too, which is exciting. Sometimes when people think agroecology or sustainable ag, they think, well, it's probably just old ways of doing agriculture. And I think there is an aspect of the knowledge from, especially when you work in other countries, indigenous knowledge, but we also want to bring it together with appropriate technology, especially when you think about the sensors that are becoming smaller and more accessible for more farmers to be able to use real-time data. So how we use appropriate technology and sensors is really exciting. That's our ag side. I could also talk about our food system side.
Well, I'm curious because you talked a lot about just, all these things that you can measure. What is some outcome that you have found of like, this is going to be something that helps our farmers, or this is some kind of outcome that helps our food systems more broadly?
So one of the things I think, and this is really in Chris Rieberg-Horton's research, he's our associate director for research at SEFS. He is in crop and soil science and also the plant form director for the new plant sciences initiative. And he's a crop scientist and has done work with organic and kind of larger scale, grains and things. And in organic systems, it is a requirement to use cover crops. Cover crops is basically a crop that you're growing that you're not bringing to market, not a cash crop. And the benefits of that is that you're working it in the soil and increasing soil organic matter. And for our soils, we tend to have lower soil organic matter. So these become really important. When you use a legume that's fixing atmospheric nitrogen, you can also grow your own nitrogen. And this is becoming even more important as the cost of nitrogen fertilizer goes up. But the thing that he's been using technology and sensors with in the field that I think is a great finding is sometimes the cover crops, you may not always see yield benefits in 1 year. And so being able to convince producers to use things, you do have to show economic benefits as well. And now he's, with these sensors measuring water availability in the soil, is able to show how cover crops and the organic matter is like a sponge for water. And the more that we hold on to that organic matter, perhaps through no-till, reducing tillage, that has huge impacts for our soils, especially that are really at times of the year where corn is young, really susceptible to drought. And so he has seen that really hold water and then be a little bit more resilient to those droughts that come. And so that has implications, small scale, big scale, and of course, across different ecosystems as well, especially as, we know that we're experiencing these things a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So you were asking if we wanted to hear a little bit about farming systems as a whole, and of course is the answer. We'd love to hear all of it.
And that's where sometimes people get we're always trying to connect these things and looking at it from a systems level view, but sometimes, especially for folks outside of agriculture and think about consumer and local is where they resonate a little bit more. We have a variety of different, I say local to programs, local farm to childcare programs, early childcare programs. So that's below kindergarten, from birth to kindergarten, let's say. We have K through 12, so farm to school programs. We have a new farm to senior services program. A lot of folks don't think about seniors and experiencing food insecurity. And so how can we use local and foods and in a way that provides new market opportunities for producers and also gets kind of healthy produce to folks. We have a meat team. I will maybe highlight that one. It's kind of unique that I don't think other people in the nation are really doing. We have a pasture-raised meat team that is local pasture-raised meat. And that was our first food system project. How do you not only help producers with the technical resources and the production resources, but when you talk about meat, you can't ignore what happens before you get it to the plate, the processing part of things, and having independent processors, the butchery knowledge, and then also getting the meat and the whole meat products, whether it's hogs or beef or chickens, to a market, and that might be different markets. When COVID hit, as well as we all know, that really shined a light on some of our challenges in our conventional system, and meat took a big hit. It was probably one of the first things you all noticed when you went to the grocery store is that there was no meat in the marketplace. Our meat team in North Carolina had producers ready to go, independent processors, and also the creativity to think about how can we take it online in bulk. And they created an app called the Meat Suite, which rolled out, and they worked with Cornell. Cornell also has this as well, to roll out how can we how can farmers sell bulk meat. So that may be a quarter cattle or something like that. Bulk has some implications and benefits for the producer. They're able to sell more, and for the processor, there's less cuts and less labor demands. And that's a big thing too when we talk about processing and being in close environments and where there was this pandemic. And so that is one of the things that is probably going to continue even beyond COVID, is the ability to sell more and to new consumers online. And so we've launched that, and they're doing a lot of training behind the scenes. That's one an example too, our NC Choices program that works hand in hand with cooperative extension. So they're working and funded by cooperative extension to be able to kind of train the trainers and work directly with the farmers, whether it be helping establish pastures and pasture management, working with butchers, and certainly working with markets too. That's kind of I think a novel one that we're doing.
Yeah, and just listening to you makes my heart sing in terms of you've got all the things related to land grant university going on right there. And it just is a perfect example of why we are NC State and why we do what we do. I love it. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we really benefit from that. I just think about, we do have partners at other institutions, and they might go out and talk to producers. When we go out and talk to producers, there's an immediate trust because we're from NC State and work with cooperative extension, and there's that long relationship. I will say though, we got some road to travel and inequities to address as well, because we haven't always worked with everybody, and I won't say we haven't, but there is some folks left out of the system, both in terms of technical resources, capital resources, access to technology. And so our Committee on Race and Equity in the Food System and SEFs is really working hard to bring that together and address that too. So yeah.
So I want to put a pin in that for just a second. I'm
Okay.
going to say something that for those of you who are live, please go ahead and start putting those questions in the chat box while Michelle tells us a little bit more about that team and what their goals are and where they are right now.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I have to say, while we have these different teams and working groups, CORE, the Committee on Race and Equity, is a really unique one in that we're trying to build a foundation for it. It is not something separate. We wanted underlying and integrate it in all of our programs and what we do, whether it be the research, education, extension. And so that's one of their goals is, first within our organization, how are we on the same page for understanding and awareness of race and equity in the food system, from the language we use, from impacts in our community, and in the greater nation and the history of things. So we do have, and actually anybody is welcome to attend these. We have in-betweens and race and equity trainings. With race and equity trainings, we have level 1, level 2. They occur a little less frequent, and in-betweens are every month, where we might highlight different issues, whether it be Latinx in the farming system, or Black History Month and women in ag and things like that. So those kind of change, and on our website we'll have them in the coming year, the different dates, and they're on Zoom, so community members as well as anybody at NC State can participate. And the other thing they do, or the things, maybe I'll mention the things that we've changed in our system after having CORE really help us in this too, is, for example, we could talk about when we want more diversity in agriculture, and, we could scratch our heads and say, well, how do we do this? And we really tried to make a commitment to this. So in our student internship and training program, we have a student internship and sustainable ag. It's open, it's paid quite well, 10-week program, and it's open to students across the nation. And we just developed, 50% or more, we want underrepresented diversity. So it becomes part of our criteria and our mission. And we have had that in the past 3 years. And, I think when we think about how we address some of the challenges, we have to start, lean in, I would say, into the spaces that we already have some assets and building. We've had an internship program for many years. So how do we start thinking about, really, how do we recruit diversity? And I think making a priority, as well as where we're recruiting from, leaning into some of our relationships here at NC State through the Manners program, Minorities in Natural Resources Agriculture. And I know I'm missing one of the A's there, agricultural systems, which is we have a chapter here, but it's also, of course, a nationwide organization, recruiting from not just our 1862s, but our 1890 institutions. And it's not just recruiting, but developing relationships and research, and then how we work with communities too, making intentional space and partnerships as well in our grants, and making sure that we're working with and funding organizations too. How do we lift up others is a big conversation we're having.
And so with all of that, we've got a question. So I'm going to read it, or several questions now. Awesome. So I'll read it to you just so that our non-live people can see it. So, do agroecologists strive to focus on the health of food post-production beyond disease and contamination with organic farming? For example, is another goal of agroecology to create food lacking in pesticides and artificial preservatives and additives that are harmful to health?
That's a good question. We don't currently have somebody that focuses on that in particular here, but I would say it is. And, we also have to examine what pesticides. There's a gradient of pesticides that are used, and there's organic based pesticides that aren't always sustainable as well. And copper, for example, is approved in organic vineyards. And is that, we have to also adjust our lens, and, and organic is not the ceiling, but the floor. We also have to examine some of those things. And I don't know if we want to increase fresh fruit and vegetables. We want a good chunk of that to be local, but it's not 100%. And we're probably not going to get rid of processed food, but how do we work with companies to infuse more agroecological knowledge and more fresh products and reduction of some of the more toxic pesticides too? And to do that is not just saying no, but also helping producers offer what are the alternatives. So when we think about pesticides, they're controlling specific type of pests. Well, weeds are impacting all farmers, small, large, and herbicides, some of them can be toxic. And there's gradients in there. So how do we think about different cultural practices, whether it be timing of planting to avoid weeds, planting density, increasing planting density? How do we, for insects, maybe look at, how do we scout? How do we understand what's there? What are thresholds that we really need to start to manage? We're not going to eradicate and have zero amounts of pests. That's unrealistic. But how do we look at where we start to have yield damages as well? So I think the big difference is almost understanding from an agroecological view is not being so reactive. Oh, I have it, I got to get rid of it. But why do I have it? How did it get here? How do I look at the larger system and over the long term too, with those sustainability principles?
Thank you. That was an excellent summary of what we should be looking at when in terms of the yes, no. It's not always a no, that it can be an yes and. And then we have another question that says, can you talk about how your expertise in ecology and ecosystems influences how you're building partnerships, approaching equity, and so on?
I love this question, Eliza. Thank you. I think about how we're trained as ecologists, and even how I was introduced to, agriculture. We're trained as ecologists is you walk into a system, we certainly want to know who's there and what they're doing, but there's almost this, we understand that all things have an ecological role, all things are valued, and then that there's this messy spider net of like interactions, and we're trying to tease them out, but we understand that they function not independently, but they're connected to each other. And in like most STEM disciplines, we do have we tend to focus on a thing that we know, but with ecologists too, at least has been my experience, is we're trying to work collaboratively with other kind of ecologists to understand, like, okay, I might work with mycorrhizal fungi, but to really understand ecosystem impacts, I got to work with a plant ecologist. And I want to have a soil ecologist or a soil scientist there too, to kind of look at the whole system. And that's how I think I've approached that in agriculture. And in certainly at CEFS, we can build large collaborative teams because we recognize each other's strengths and we know things are interconnected and over the long term. And so we've been able to be quite successful with these larger grants and things, because we also have, I'll be honest, relationships over time, which matter. And I think about the health of that too, as a functioning center or a department or working group, is there's a sense of trust and a sense of collaborativeness I've never felt in any other kind of group in sustainable ag or agroecology. There's a lot of people aren't interested in, building empires or kind of walling people off. They know that their success depends upon others. And so that's actually, I think that's how I approach things. I admit too, probably me personally, I didn't come from an agricultural background. I wasn't trained in agronomy. And I came at it with the lens of conservation biology, actually, tropical fragments, which is agriculture and, conservation biology don't always see eye to eye, but I worked in the tropics and in Costa Rica and Central America. And, there is not one natural system where there's not an agricultural system right next to it. And so kind of worked with farmers and understood, they're the real stewards of the land, and how can we make land already dedicated to agriculture more sustainable over the long term, helps us reduce our impact on some of those natural systems and fragments. So I have never assumed, especially when I'm going somewhere else, that I know the answers. And I work in a more of a democratic space with especially producers. They bring knowledge, I bring knowledge, and how do we work together to identify the challenge, identify the solution. I know I'm not supposed to say jargon, but that's community participatory research. And I think that's a real key in ecology and agroecology too.
It's okay to use jargon as long as you define it.
Okay.
So we are actually out of time, but if you have just a couple minutes to answer this last question, sure. I think I would appreciate that. Says, are there insects or pests, animals that you actually encourage from the ecological perspective of building a diverse agricultural system?
Yes. There's no true pest in ecology. It's a social construction of humans. Those are just plants and insects and animals functioning. So I think a good perspective of this is, what is a pest? We ask that. It's something that I don't want to be growing there at that time. And one example I have of this at the agroecology education farm is, we have crabgrass and we have Johnson grass, and that gets in the way of me producing tomatoes and lovely vegetables and food that goes into our dining services. So everything we produce goes in the plate of students. And we have beef cattle in a pasture graze system on the farm. And I was talking to that beef manager and I said, oh, we have Johnson grass and crabgrass. He's like, wonderful, because the cattle need to eat that. So that's not a pest for him. And that's great, actually, that there is something there. It's a lot more nutrition wise. They're not going to eat the tomatoes and things like that. So it's that perspective and mind shift sometimes. I guess that's just an example weed wise. And, we also have a buffer. Some of those things might be considered weeds in an agricultural system, but we actually keep a buffer from any kind of pesticide drift from around us in conventional systems. We've planted it in some of the natives, grasses and wildflowers, and now it attracts a lot of biodiversity, and there's a lot of birders that come out to see that. So pest, well, it depends on, we have to kind of do a mind shift, I think, a little bit too.
So I do want to say thank you so much for coming to talk today about agroecology and CEFs and all the things you're doing. And I also want to put a plug in for anybody who has not gone to visit CEFs or the agroecology farm. They are amazing places to go. And it was just making me think I need to take Patience to CEFs because I don't think she's ever been. But it's just a wonderful place to just appreciate how much work that NC State is putting into our food systems. So I want to thank all of y'all for watching, and remember that we broadcast every third Friday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And next time we're going to be talking to Dr. Jason Bocaro. I can always mispronounce his name and I apologize. He is a professor in parks, recreation, and tourism management, and we'll be discussing his work in physical activity and health in diverse populations. So you can always find more information about us on the Wolfpack web series website. And as a reminder, I'm your host, Susie Goodell. And until next time, be well.
Thank you, Susie. This was wonderful. Thanks to all that were here.